All right, good morning. Welcome to a panel discussion on a world without waste. We have three panelists today. Don Fullerton, the Gutschel Professor of Finance at UIUC, Ning in the Urban Planning and Policy Program at UIC, and me, I'm Tom Theis. I direct the Institute for Environmental Science and Policy at UIC. We're going to get started. We have a narrow time slot here. So I'll pose this as a question, a world without waste, because it seems preposterous to just say it. Most of us have grown up surrounded by waste. But what is it, after all? Well, here's a few things we can say about it. It's something nobody wants. It results from, at least from an engineering point of view, from inefficiencies and from a socio-cultural point of view, human carelessness. In modern societies, we usually have to pay to get rid of it. It can be hazardous to our health and, of course, damaging to the environment. And the damages are almost always economic externalities. So it seems like an impossible task, so many limits. There are thermodynamic limits to this, social cultural limits, economic limits, and I might add there are quite a few legal and policy limits as well. So let's get started. About 2 years after the Brundtland report was issued, a paper appeared in Scientific American by Bob Frosch and Nikolopoulos called Strategies for Manufacturing. They established a premise, namely that natural ecosystems take in and transform energy, but produce very little waste. So F&G asked a very simple question. Why can't industrial systems, human design systems, be like natural systems? And within a few years, that spawned a new field called industrial ecology. I think of it as a kind of an applied science, where we seek opportunities to minimize waste production. We take the broad life cycle view to understand the environmental impacts of complex systems. We do apply new technologies for the development of clean processes, practices, products. But technology is only going to carry us so far. We also do inquiries into new approaches to environmental policy and organizational and human behavior to overcome barriers to implementation. So this is a diagram, a very simple diagram of an industrial economy. We call it linear, and it has 5 stages. We dig stuff up, we turn it into something, we sell it, distribute it, we use it, and then we dump it, usually in landfills. We call this linear because that's what most of us do, and it's a pretty simple model. Unfortunately, it causes some good things and some bad things. Here's a kind of a good thing from the linear economy. The number of people in extreme poverty has declined considerably over the last 70 or 80 years. That's a good thing. Now, you might say, yeah, but there's 8 billion people in the world. Well, maybe that's not such a good thing. Still, this is a system that delivers, if not the greatest good for the greatest number, a lot of good for the greatest number. Okay. Unfortunately, we also have lots of damaging emissions. This is carbon dioxide emissions in billions of tons. And you can see that it continues to rise. A dip or two here or there, usually because of a recession, but on the whole, it goes up at a 45-degree angle, and damages result from that. Same with waste. Here's plastic waste, which has skyrocketed over the past 50 or so years, with very little of it recycled or reused. And of course, it's showing up all over the place in mountains of stuff and in beaches and the oceans and so on and so forth. All right, so we have problems here. You'll see this diagram again today. This is what we call the circular economy, in distinction to the linear one that I just showed. This has most of the same, This has most of the same stages in it that the linear one did, except the very end where we dump stuff, we put in a new section where we recycle, remanufacture, and reuse materials, trying to keep materials in the circular economy and the value of those materials for as long as possible. Yes, there may be some waste produced, but hopefully far less than the linear system produces. Now, you might ask, is this really possible? It is. And we have several examples. I'm going to show you what I think is the most spectacular example of waste minimization. It takes place in a little town called Kalundborg, Denmark. I've located it on the map here. It's about 40,000 people, not a big town at all, and nothing particularly special or unusual about it, except they've built an industrial ecosystem. It started in 1972, and it's grown since then. It presently consists of 11 public and private companies, including the municipality itself of Kalundborg. Their goal is to make goods and services that use least cost combination of inputs. And they do this by using and reusing residues and energy from one company going to the next. All told, there are about 30 exchanges that have come and engineered into the system. It's kind of interesting. Kalundborg has been studied a lot. How did this happen? And the best anybody's come up with is it grew rather organically rather than some grand plan. It grew one economically viable contractual exchange at a time. In other words, each one of these exchanges had to make financial sense, or it simply wasn't done. Now, you have to remember that Kalundborg grew under a different ethic towards the environment than we generally have in the United States. For them, this was a natural thing to do. But for us, it's become kind of difficult. We do have some organizations like this. We call them eco-industrial parks, but nothing on the grand scale of Kalundborg. Now, having said that, Kalundborg is not perfect. It's powered by fossil fuels to begin with. However, the collective emissions from all 11 entities are 50 to 80% less than if the companies operated individually. So that is rather impressive. Now I want to show you, I'm just going to stop share for a second and show you something else. This is the website, the Danish website of Kalundborg. What you see is an aerial view here of the industrial ecosystem. The colored lines outline each different industry. And most of them are co-located. They're very close to one another. They have a series of pipelines that carry the materials and waste energy around this system. I like this schematic view a little bit better. What it shows is the 11 entities again, and the various exchanges of energy, water, and materials that take place among them. This makes it look like a, I don't know, like a living ecosystem, I guess, except it's industrial. This is interactive. You can click on any one of these and it tells you what it is. So that one is district heating. They heat the homes in Kalundborg, the waste heat from the power plant. Let's see, there's another one over here. Ethanol waste, which is used in other industries, and so on. You can play with this. The website is there, and you can look it up and work with it. Okay, my time is just about up, so I'm going to hand it off now to Ning, who's going to give you other examples of waste management. And take it away, Ning.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Theis, for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. It's a privilege to share our perspectives with our distinguished colleagues. So I'll follow up adding some perspectives as a city planner. Growing population live within cities to support urban growth, intensify the energy, water, and the materials needed. The residues of urban production and of consumption activities, such as waste, were considered out of sight, out of mind. Thomas Gower described it as invisible urbanism. Basically, the products must still be made, the power generated, the water pumped, and the sewage treated, but let it be done elsewhere and invisibly. So here comes the waste disposal. Trash cans can be designed to be artistic. Trash cans can be underground and hidden, like the system in Swish. Trash trucks can even disappear in city roads when those pneumatic collection systems could simply collect the waste and suck it up and like an underground vacuum. But none of these solutions would make waste disappear. What we are discussing here is the circular model that is fundamentally different from the take, make, disposal model. The model acknowledges that material waste management involves all stages of material storage, collection, transfer, treatment, and disposal. Sorry. Can you hear me all right? Everything going all right? I heard a comment or Patricia, was that you? All right. If there's anything or connection issues, please let me know. So circular economy aims to improve resource productivity, reduce waste pollution, and achieve the highest utility and value of materials. Notably, circular economy focuses on more design, intention, behavior, planning, instead of end-of-pipe engineering solutions that restorative and regenerative in this case. So when we consider material waste management in the historical context, notably those issues affect what we do at this moment today. Drivers of material waste management changes over time. It began with the hygiene and sanitation concerns and continuously battling with land availability and the waste disposal capacity shortages. Over time, material waste management have been driven by resource constraints and scarcity, significant growth of the waste management industry, and the social injustice concerns. Notably, overseas waste import ban and COVID-19 have significantly changed waste composition, generation, management methods that all vary by location, material category, and social economic factors, which increase the urgency of locally integrated solutions. Clearly, the transformation from the linear model to the circular model we are discussing here requires multidisciplinary and better interdisciplinary knowledge and coordinated efforts. When it comes to implementation, however, challenges are also evident. The most fundamental challenge is inventory. Unlike water, electricity that can be metered at household building level, we have very limited data related to materials. And there are significant inconsistencies in databases. Given budget constraints, we do not have a clearly defined framework to identify the priorities. Could we do it by weight, volume, cost, hazard level, or local infrastructure availability? There is also an issue of boundary setting. Would that be temporal, graphical, sectoral, or through the life cycle stages? In terms of the economics, which Professor Don Fullerton will follow up shortly, will be another necessary concern, acknowledging that environmentally sustainable model have to be financially and economically sustainable in the first place. Broadly speaking, there are society issues, and constantly we are facing the trade-offs by sector, by community, between efficiency and equity, and there comes the equity and the justice concerns. Essentially, if we want to integrate this, we need an integrated model, but all the models have this heterogeneities and coordination integration challenges when it comes to different objectives, clients, boundaries, as I have briefly discussed here. So a couple of years ago, motivated by these untapped opportunities, I led a publication for the American Planning Association, which advocates for the role of social sciences for these engineering fields. Besides the environmental impacts we all have been familiar with by now, like air, water, land, noise, climate change, we will also consider the other factors that need to be integrated into this material management process. For example, we need to plan for all activities along the logistic chain that necessitate infrastructure support. When we promote landfill promotion, when we promote recycling ordinance, we also need to know we need the infrastructure, we need educational programs. The circular economy model also necessitates the support of sustainable funding, which address the negative externalities of irresponsible behaviors, such as littering and landfilling, and the positive externalities of recycling, reuse, and recovery, which Dr. Don Fullerton will cover more in detail. So it is an underappreciated fact that with divergence, whether regulatory or market-induced, creates new businesses and jobs. In Illinois, waste management industry engaged over 15,000 employees, receiving over 1 billion payroll, contributing total sales of over $4 billion annually. What matters is really how we could design and create greener jobs. Historically, when we consider the equity issues about material waste management, it has mostly centered on locations of the facilities, or we say facility siting. But increasingly brought to our concern will include accessibility and affordability of the materials, environmental amenities, services, the material consumption patterns, as well as discard and end-of-life management patterns. Essentially, we are benefiting from advanced technology. Note, however, though, those advanced smart technology has not been fully utilized in the material and waste management practice. And more importantly, we need the data, we need information at refined geographical scales and shorter intervals that can better inform the policy design and improve the efficiency and effectiveness of material and waste management. So here is example that illustrate the critical value of inventory data at a refined geographical scale and why material and community-specific design is most desirable in a case of food waste in the city of Chicago. We estimate that 450,000 tons per year about food waste getting generated in the city of Chicago. Among those, 14,000 tons have recovery potential, which means they are still edible and can be recovered for human consumption. However, there is a significant challenge there. Food is different from electronics, paper, plastics that we often consider reusable, recyclable. Those can endure longer transit time and longer turnaround time for logistics planning. So when it comes to food waste recovery, logistics will play a most important role. Then we noted the importance of spatial implications and conducted a spatial analysis. The map on the left basically compares the volume of surplus food to the communities in need of represented by the number of food banks as well as food insecure people. Those communities highlighted in red here show those in high need of food. Those in gray have more surplus food, but not as many food banks in those communities. This is clearly suggested need of citywide coordination, but also leaves out the thought-provoking idea. Why are we exporting all the food waste, sending them to remote landfill sites, while we could have locally managed them, minimize the environmental and social impacts, and address the dual goal of food wastage and insecurities? The map on the right shows another example of spatial disparity. Basically, it shows the community level possibility or feasibility of pickup services, drop-off services, and backyard composting when it's in proposing and implementing decentralized composting system. Clearly, there are community level heterogeneities, which requires community-specific design of the policy. Together, this suggested the equity, transportation impact, and resource inefficiencies, and all the costs that had been unnecessarily incurred because of this spatial disparity and unsustainable design of the policy programs. When we implement these programs, we have to acknowledge there are various stakeholders. Often the public point our fingers to big, large industry sectors for their pollution. However, we have to realize this is not just a public service when it comes to material and waste management. It requires all sectors' collaborative efforts. We cannot count on the technology to solve the problem if our individuals do not feel conscious and valuable when it comes to material use and consumption. I highlighted here households, tourist industries, other waste generators here, because this is the source of the problem. This is the origin of the issue. If we only focus on annual pipe issues, then that's always the post-crisis management process. We are not fundamentally addressing this. And actually, based on our estimates of food waste in Chicago, 2/3 of the food discards coming from household sectors, which are currently still under-regulated. To wrapping up, I want to share the thoughts and the concern that material and waste management actually is one of the largest municipal budget, but we have so limited understanding about it, and it is still inadequately understood and sustainably managed. We also need to know, besides engineering solutions, there are data issues, there are market dynamics, political will, and the industry behaviors. Those are all playing a role in terms of sustainable material and waste management when we are transforming our economy to a circular model. Essentially, engineering solutions alone will not make waste vanish. Every individual sector and discipline has a role to play. So moving from here, I'm inviting Professor Fullerton to continue this discussion.
Well, thank you, Ning. In fact, that's a great segue. I'm happy to be here. This is all wonderful stuff to reinvigorate this. I did some research on garbage and recycling more than 20 years ago, and the interest has picked up finally, so this is great. These first two lines are straight from Ning's previous slide that says engineering solutions alone will not make waste vanish, and therefore every individual sector and discipline has a role to play. But the next bullet, Ning's going to advance it for me when I say, okay, is basically that individuals don't necessarily have an incentive to play that role. I mean, tossing garbage is cheap. You can put anything out at the curb and the city will come pick it up. What could be easier than that? And so by asking people to involve themselves in the circular economy, we're really asking them to incur costs upon themselves to go to some effort or money to recycle or to dispose of that waste carefully. And, you know, most of the benefits are going to everybody else. Worldwide benefits from reducing waste anywhere in the world. It's, you know, it's like climate change in that regard. You know, no individual person or even a country has much incentive to reduce their own emissions or their own waste if it comes at some cost to themselves, because the benefits are worldwide. And so the individual cost benefit analysis is not worthwhile, but the social cost benefit analysis is. You know, there's social costs to doing this circular economy activities, and the benefits worldwide exceed those costs, but not the benefits to yourself. In other words, everybody may gain the most, maximizing social welfare if everybody helps. And each person might feel like, you know, I will if you will, because then we could all do it together. But if you're not going to do it, then why should I do it? Or in any case, one person has an incentive to free ride because you can get a larger individual gain if everybody else is the one who's contributing to this effort. But of course, if a lot of people act that way, then we're not getting anywhere. So, okay, then there's a role for public policy. And, you know, if we individually feel like I'd be willing to do it if everybody was helping, but not if I'm the only one, you know, that's the free rider motivation. Well, public policy, government can, you know, enact some rules so that everybody does participate and we're all better off. We can get more joint effort with higher net gains because, you know, we'll each incur some individual cost, but we'll all be able to reap the benefits of everybody else's recycling effort and circular economy effort. Okay. Well, I'm going to show you this same picture again and remind you what's in it. We have raw materials coming in at the top. I'm going to emphasize a little bit more of this product design phase for engineers like Tom and other people we work with to make a product that can be recycled. And then, of course, after the design, it has to be produced and manufactured or remanufacturing, used by consumers or by other industries, but eventually gets to consumers, and they can use it, reuse it, repair it. And when they're done, there'll be you know, there'll be waste, and they have to somehow divide it between some small amount of residual waste and larger amounts of recycling, and that can go back in with the raw materials to production. Well, there's barriers at each of these stages, and I'm going to talk about 6 of the barriers and what we can do about it. But the barriers include policy, technology, information. People have already formed these habits. They might not know how to recycle. They might not do it the right way. The engineers have not developed all the technologies for recycling. There's behavioral issues, but because we're counting on individual behavior and they might not do it right. They might not sort the recycling. And there's a whole culture that we need to overturn, and government can help. So first of all, government can regulate raw material extraction. Virgin material extraction, the timber industry maybe needs to be regulated so that they're not clear cutting and causing erosion. The mining industry needs to be regulating so they're not dumping stuff in the river. The use of these resources can be taxed just to discourage the use of virgin resources. And those would all be ways to offset the negative effects of mining and timber. But instead, we have these policy barriers because they're doing literally the wrong thing. The government is leasing federal lands for grazing at too cheap a price, and so they're getting overgrazed, and these could be protected better for environmental reasons. They're selling timber rights on federal land for what's you know, maybe the market price, but the free market, private market kind of a price for timber is not the same as the social cost of cutting timber. And government, since it's a policy entity, could be charging the true social cost, including the negative external costs for those timber rights instead of selling them too cheaply. So policy is actually working the wrong way, and we could fix that. But anyway, on to the next phase. Okay, we have product design, and you know, the firms do not have sufficient incentive to make stuff that can be recycled. The firms don't care, basically because the consumers don't care, and the consumers don't care because they can throw away stuff for free. So if consumers are not going to any effort to recycle, then they don't care if what they buy is, you know, can be recycled or not. And they're not sending those market signals to the firms. You know, we need consumers to be able to tell the firms through their market behavior that we want stuff that can be recycled. But if you can throw away stuff for free at the curb, then you don't really care necessarily. I mean, some people will care, but there's no financial incentive, and some people don't care, and some people just try to free ride, do whatever's cheap and easy. And so they're not sending the market signal to the firms to make stuff that can be recycled. And then third, businesses need information. Government can help provide information. They can help provide an incentive for firms to recycle their waste. The question is whether we should count on social responsibility or whether there's some explicit subsidies and encouragement and information provision and behavioral nudges that could get firms to engage in more remanufacturing reuse, and change their production processes to generate less waste. So after production, we're on to the households, and this is where habits have been formed by people with the wrong incentives. If they're throwing away stuff for free, then they don't want to buy stuff that can be repaired. I've got too many things in my house already that cannot be repaired if I wanted to. And then to reuse the goods after they've been repaired, or to sell them to somebody else that can use them. A lot of consumers don't have the information they need about how to do that. And of course, policy can encourage all of that by changing the prices that people face, maybe putting a price per can or per bag of garbage collected at the curb, for example, to encourage recycling. Currently, households will pay a property tax or a monthly fee or something, but no price per can they put out to the curb. So any additional marginal, more garbage is free, so to speak, if you've already paid your monthly fee. And so they could use information here at number 5 about how to, they could need information about how to recycle stuff. They could use behavioral nudges. They could use incentives. They could be subsidized on their waste. They could be paid for their recycling, maybe. Of course, there's transaction costs in the market like that. But most of all, we just really need to change the culture of recycling, because some people are just paying no attention. They have habits already. There's no community, or not sufficient community spirit to do that. And so there's probably too much residual waste being generated. And then finally, number 6, the waste that's actually going to the landfill and by the way, there's other places to dispose of toxic materials, not just a landfill, but all of that needs to be regulated. And because there's negative effects from each of those, just from the landfill, methane releases, possible problems with the landfill, leachate getting into groundwaters. They need to be sanitary landfills. They need to vent the methane. They need to reduce the litter from the trucks on the way to the landfill. And charging a fee for disposal, of course, has been much discussed. Not just a tipping fee but for the truck, but even a fee per can for the households. But a problem is that could generate some illegal dumping if people want to avoid the fee by just dumping in the woods. The other thing I want to point out on the next slide, Ning, is that all these policies, I pointed to 6 different points around this circle and talked about policy interventions at each of these 6 points around the circle. But any one of these policies pointing at one part of the circle can affect behavior all the way around the circle. For example, if were able to charge a fee per bag of trash that was not not causing people to do illegal dumping or to avoid the fee by dumping in the woods or dumping in commercial dumpsters or dumping in vacant lots. But if you successfully had a fee per bag of trash, then consumers would realize that they want to cut down on the garbage, that they could recycle more, and they could try to buy products that can be recycled, and they would be sending the market signals to firms to design stuff and make stuff that can be recycled, because then we'll buy it, and we'll buy it because we don't want to have to put stuff in the trash can where we'd have to pay for it. So that's all a good idea, except for the next bullet. Well, this is a additional good thing, that if there's a fee for garbage collection for the landfill, then that might encourage additional recycling. And if that gets back to the firms, then they might reduce their virgin material extraction. And that's a good thing, because there's negative externalities from, the timber extraction, the mining extraction, the oil and gas, which are now being encouraged, by the way. I forgot to mention earlier, oil and gas gets tax depletion allowances. Timber gets to depreciate stuff even as the trees are growing and becoming more valuable. They get to depreciate their asset for tax purposes. The policy is currently pointing in the wrong direction. We may want to discourage that kind of stuff. But then on the next bullet, another interaction, that fee per bag might generate worse dumping and burning, which I mentioned. And then onward from that, the next bullet says, firms could be subsidized for the use of recycling materials. Now that's pointing at a different point on the circle. Instead of or in addition to, or instead of pointing or targeting the policy at consumers by charging a fee for garbage collection, we could instead be subsidizing firms for their use of recycled materials. And that might encourage product redesign for products that can be recycled. And those firms, if they get subsidized on their amount of recycling, might make it easier for households to do the recycling. But then there's a problem with that in the next bullet, which is that a subsidy recycling could actually encourage virgin material extraction. This is one of the unintended effects, or the perverse possible outcomes. And just to see the logic of this point, it's not a totally absurd example, but a somewhat extreme example. If there's a subsidy for the recycling of stuff that was extracted virgin material, aluminum or timber or something like that, if the subsidy is big enough, it might actually encourage that virgin material extraction to get more stuff eligible to be recycled and to get that subsidy. In other words, the virgin material subsidy might actually encourage virgin material extraction. And then finally, the point of all of this and this interaction between the policies all the way around the circle is just that we're going to need a balanced combination of policies. It's a difficult problem to get it right. We might need a tax or a regulation of virgin material extraction in order to discourage negative externalities from mining and clear cutting of timber, grazing on federal land, oil and gas, all those, the particularly negative effects of those can be discouraged. That might raise the cost. Those regulations might raise the cost of extraction, and that's fine if it reduces overall total extraction, because that might encourage more recycling input into production in place of the virgin material extraction. But then another policy might be trying to subsidize firms to do the recycling. You might subsidize the consumers to do the recycling. And of course, a regulation, they just need to be coordinated and get to the right combination of policies on virgin material extraction, on product design, on reuse, on repair, on recycling, and on disposal. Thank you. So I'll stop there, and I think we're going next to questions.
We are. One quick second, though. I found out that my last slide on Kallenborg didn't show, so I just want to show it briefly here. You should be able to see this now. This is the harbor itself and co-located companies outlined in these colored lines. And this is what it looks like in schematic form. Sort of comes alive, I guess. And you can click on any one of these and see what the exchange is that's being depicted in the diagram. As I say, you have this link as part of the slides. Okay, so we had a couple of questions. One of them to you, Don, is a carbon tax a good idea? And how does it fit in with improving government regulation, especially the US government?
I just had a long conversation on the phone with Catherine Rampell at the Washington Post, who just published her piece about that in the Washington Post, about how it might not be necessary. I mean, Biden has said in the last debate that he was going to, phase out the oil and gas industry, and the Republicans wanted to make political hay of that. Catherine has been pushing the idea of a carbon tax in the past, and I have as well. And if we started that 20 years ago, that might have been a good thing to get people moving faster, so we don't have all the collection of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that we already have additional amount collected in the past 20 years in the atmosphere. But currently, the oil and gas is phasing out on its own anyway. That's the point of her piece in the Washington Post. Policy might affect the speed of the phase out, but it's phasing out. Coal is not economically viable. So there's going to be no new coal plants anyway. You don't need Democrats to have a war on coal to phase out the coal plants. They're on their way out anyhow. That's partly because natural gas is cheaper because of fracking, but also renewables are cheaper. And the problem with a carbon tax is that people will be actually paying for their carbon emissions, which in the short run can be very difficult for low-income families that are in places where they need fossil fuel heat in the winter, and other places in the South that need fossil fuel electricity for air conditioning in the summer, and that could be very disruptive in the short run. I mean, the carbon tax could be throwing miners out of work faster, and coal-fired power plant operators out of work faster, and of course, disadvantaging some of those households that need to use fossil fuels. There are these tax and dividend plans where carbon tax revenue could be used to return funds, especially to low-income families, but it doesn't get to the right families. I mean, low-income families on the coasts or that live in moderate climates don't need as much fossil fuels for air conditioning or for heat. And they come out ahead with a dividend that goes equally to everybody, whereas people that live in the middle of the country and need currently using fossil fuels for heat or for air conditioning, that might not be enough compensation for them. In other words, the compensation is going to the wrong people, not to the people that are spending on that have to spend on carbon products during the transition with a long commute. Until you can change your job or change your house, you're going to have to spend on carbon intensive goods.
We're almost out of time, but we do have one more comment question here from Cindy Klein-Benai. She says the real problem is that manufacturers are making products that are hard to recycle. For example, here in Chicago, we cannot recycle number 6 plastic at all, and the market price is so low, the manufacturers can't find outlets. There are new products all the time made of plastic that can't be recycled at all, like tubes with baby food in them. And no one wants glass anymore. What about policy to make manufacturers responsible? Extended producer responsibility. It's also very confusing to people. What goes in, what bin, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's probably true. Either of you have any comment on that? Well, hearing none.
Ning, you're muted. Go ahead.
I was muted. This is a topic that has raised a lot of controversies, I think, in both economics and policy making process. Essentially, it's similar to the carbon tax controversy when we address the externalities related to the production process. Essentially, all the downstream activities will be affected. I think that's one of the most essential concerns for public policy to change that. But it is not completely impossible or bold, ambitious idea. European countries, for example, well ahead of us, holding those producers, designers accountable. Basically, when they develop, for example, electronic products and devices, then they need to be explicit about the end-of-life solutions. So that's that example, at least a possible path to inspire other nations and the users of that. But essentially, I cannot emphasize more about the economics behind it. The underlying factor is the cost. If the synthetic materials, if the foam packaging always cheaper as reflecting the market price, then it will never reveal the effective incentives on the market for either producers or consumers to adopt those materials. So essentially, it requires a statewide policy, not just a piecemeal patchwork requiring any individual sectors or individual companies to do that. Otherwise, there will be spillover effects. Shall I stop here? So, Professor Dunn.
Well, our time is up, but we do have one more question. Nobody's cutting us off, so let's go ahead. Jane Lynn said, incentivizing individuals to participate is crucial in recycling. but it's no easy task. Are there any successful novel incentive mechanisms implemented in the US or other countries in that regard? Okay, we have 5 minutes. We're told we have 5 minutes to wrap it up.
Shall I? Or?
Yeah, go ahead. Do
So,
some wrapping.
Quickly, yeah, looks like Jane is focusing on residential sector. So we do have established programs, fortunately, in the US already, operating by either private sector or municipalities. The private sector called Recycle Bank, basically providing cost rebates to consumers who decide to drop off their recyclables. There are different ways of doing that. For example, people drop their used plastic bottles and get some rebate back, kind of deposit system. And some are based on the weighting system. When garbage is collected, recyclables are collected, it is weighted and information is transferred to the central management facilities. And then based on the weight of the recyclables, the households will get rebate on a monthly basis in terms of the grocery vouchers or retail vouchers. So that has been implemented for individual firms. If you actually also cover that, there are apparently tax relief and other subsidies in the research and development on that. I think Professor Fullerton is ready to follow up.
Well, I was just going to add one thought to what Ning was saying, which is absolutely right. But there's also an issue of transactions costs and administrative costs of any one of these policies. And so I would tend to recommend that we not try to push too far the idea of deposit refunds for individual items. I mean, maybe especially for toxic items, if you're worried about lead acid batteries, yeah, there's a $5 or $10 deposit when you buy a new car or a new battery. And because it's important that not go into the landfill. You get your $10 back when you replace your battery if you turn in the old battery, and that all works fine. But for all of those, aluminum cans and glass bottles, it's very costly to count them out for 15 cents a piece, or a dime, or 25 cents a piece in different states. It's counting them out individually. Even machines can count them out, but why bother? The same kinds of incentives can be provided by a subsidy to a recycling processing plant that just weighs them by the ton. So after they gather together all of the aluminum cans that are put out at the curb, you gather them together, crush them, weigh them, get how many tons of aluminum, and it's easy to report that to be eligible for a subsidy. Same thing with glass or metal cans or paper or something else. And in fact, in some locations, the individual deposit refunds on cans and bottles have interfered with curbside recycling, and they're just sort of inconsistent policies. And I would tend to recommend the free curbside pickup of all recycling. Make it easy for the consumers. Don't make the consumers sort it, because they won't do it right and they won't want to. Just pick it up, sort it for them, give a subsidy to the processing firm.
Okay, well, I guess we have to wrap this up. There is one last comment. We'll let this be the last word from Lisa Powell. She says, I agree, setting taxes as closely as possible to the externality will help to shift behavior away from these products and or producers to use materials less harmful to the environment. Amen to that. All right, I think that concludes our panel. My thanks to my two fellow panelists. You were magnificent, both of you. We have to do this again sometime. It's been so much fun. Oh, hi, Celeste. Are we truly done now? Celeste? You're muted.
You're muted.
I wanted to keep quiet. I think Patty will shut down the program, right?
Okay, what's going to happen to the recording? Is that going to be distributed?
Yes, good, Patty. And we will let you know, Tom. I'm not sure with the technological stuff, but definitely.
Okay.
Thank you
Well,
so much.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thank
Very
you.
interesting,
Thank you, Tom.
very
Thank you for
interesting.
having us.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ning.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Oh, link distributed by Tim Oravec.
I'm using a
the-
new laptop today because my previous one failed me on videos. So there was some unexpected bumps here and there.
You all did very well. It was so interesting. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
My camera dropped on me today, so I had
No.
to use another laptop to be on.
No. Okay. It
All
worked
right.
out so well.
All right, thank you so much, Seth, for having me. It's wonderful.
Oh,
Get connected.
you contributed so much, and this was a wonderful panel.
We'll be
I
in
wish I
touch.
could go to every panel. I'm gonna have to see some of them recorded, but
Yes.
I couldn't
Parallel
miss this.
sessions.
I couldn't
Yeah.
miss this one. Thank
All right.
you.
Okay.
Take
See you
care.
later in the afternoon. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.